went to my first AAEA national meeting in 1948 in Chicago. I had just joined the Farm Journal staff that year as livestock editor, and I was there covering the livestock show. So I went over to the AAEA meeting just to sit in, which I did, and that was my first session. Then successively to that, I was there every year from then until 1970. In 1952, I joined the organization at the suggestion of Carol Streeter, who was editor of Farm Journal. And I think it was 1966 that I was elected to the board of directors. And in 1967 became vice president of AAEA. And then, at that time, the vice president was in charge of the next year's program, the national program for the meeting in Chicago. So meantime, I had been talking with some of the young Turks who hadn't been coming to meetings because they didn't feel that it was worthwhile. So I put on the program a panel of young Turks to talk about what AAEA could do at their meetings that would be of use to young editors. As a result of that, the next morning, as the new president, I appointed a communication clinic committee. And that became the main event of the national meeting from then for several years. The idea was to help people do a better job of what they were doing and inviting young editors to come, and they did in great numbers. And then in '68, when I was president, I put on the meeting agenda the matter of incorporating the farm women editors who had their own organization. Carol Streeter carried that on the floor discussion, and it passed unanimously. And from then on, the men editors and the women editors met at the same time and in the same organization. That kind of thing helped boost the interest of young journalists and back at the land-grant colleges who were taking ag journalism, particularly at the University of Illinois, where Jim Evans was the enthusiastic head of the department, and enrollment of women, primarily farm girls, in agriculture journalism jumped, and farm magazines started to hire farm women editors, not just to write about the home or the kitchen or whatever, but to also write about production agriculture, marketing. And so that was a big change, big step in the organization. That's the award of honor for distinguished service to farm journalism. I got that in 1968 when I was the president of the organization. After I resigned in 1970 and went with the Department of Agriculture as head of information. And prior to that, a year or two, I had spoken at the national meeting of the Fertilizer Institute. And Jamie Whitten, who was the House chairman of Ag Appropriations, and also chairman of the General Appropriations Bill, and I had lunch and were talking about the difficulties of getting good farm legislation because no longer were members of Congress either a generation away from the farm or had family on farms, so they didn't understand agriculture. Butts came aboard, and Jamie Whitten invited Secretary Butts and I to come up and eat with him on the Hill. And he brought up this matter of the need for better understanding throughout the country and part of people in general about agriculture. And he said to me, could you use it if I hid $1 million in your budget? And I said, well, I can try to hide it, but I certainly would use it. So I formed an organization called PACER, which included each of the major farm communication groups, their presidents. And I asked them if they would put up a little money, and if they would, I would use part of this $1 million to conduct a national survey on the general understanding and opinions about farmers and farm programs and so on. So they went together and did that. I asked them to put the questions together because I didn't want the government to be in charge of the survey. So it was their survey, they conducted it, and then as a result of that, they got together, those organizations, and formed a group the next summer that became a general meeting in Washington, D.C. of these various farm communication groups. And that was the first time that those groups had worked together and met together and were cooperating in a general program of some kind. They were instrumental in having me focus my attention on all ag communications, not just in Farm Magazine, and to carry through with that later then as I did. And the communication clinics, which we had annually, were very instrumental in helping all of us, including me and any other editors. So it was very important to me. The year that I was president, I with Charlie Scruggs, put together the Code of Ethics for farm publications. At that time, advertisers were trying to make their copy look like editorial copy. And some of the publications felt compelled to go along with that in order to get the money. So we put together the Code of Ethics, which was that foremost, farmers were interested in farm advertising. They got ideas on new equipment as a result of that. And that's an important part of the magazines, but the editorial content should always be in the hands of the editors of the publication, not commercial companies. And that Code of Ethics then stood behind those publications, who as a result of that Code of Ethics made farm magazines toe the line in terms of being there for farm people first and not to slip over and let advertising look like it was editorial content. You know, being on a magazine staff is a high calling. You're responsible for being diligent and creative in bringing something to farm families that will help them, and bring things to agriculture that would help agriculture. Our magazines were not to amuse people, not to show pictures, but to help them. And that kind of help in agriculture leads to the main objective of agriculture, which is to raise food productively, cleanly, for the population. And every country is known by how well it does that. And as a result of the farm magazines, which started way back in the colonial days, of bringing new information to farm homes and farm communities, was instrumental in this becoming the best agricultural country in the world, and the economy of this country becoming the best and strongest economy in the world. So it's a high calling. Nobody knows but the editor who's working on the story what's in his notebook, and he has a responsibility for quoting his sources correctly and to work on things and think of things that will be helpful when it arrives in the mailbox as a friend of the farm family that goes out to pick it up. And that responsibility is with every one of the farm editors in the business and the farm communicators in the business who are working with farmers to produce food for the United States. And they do it so well that it's enabled this country to become the #1 nation in the world and the leader in the world. The young people who streamed off of farms into land-grant universities became important in industry and in all phases of life. And so the agriculture of the United States is the backbone and the #1 responsibility of a government and of people who work with nature every day, keeping in mind that next storm coming over the hill might have hail in it.